The principle of emergence is a much better way of understanding human consciousness. Consider the profound complexity of the human brain. There is more complexity of networked connections within your brain than there are connections between stars and planets in an entire galaxy. The complexity of your brain, and more broadly, your mind, is unknowable and unpredictable. And we do not live alone. We are constantly connecting with other human beings, networking, communicating, planning together, working together, competing together, getting to know each other, forming relational knowledge and bonds between us in complex, changing, and evolving webs of human networks. Thus, the complexity of human capacity increases exponentially with the complexity in networked human relations. Consciousness emerges out of that incalculable complexity of the networking of human minds and brains. It arises from the fundamental drive of humans to harmonize and communicate and cooperate with one another. This social evolution is human nature, and it produces human consciousness. Hello, welcome to Being Humans, or Better Together. I'm Ian Christopher Wendt. This is our second set of episodes. We'll be discussing consciousness, awareness, agency, or the will to choose, and how to increase our awareness and make decisions that improve our world. What is consciousness? Where does our consciousness come from? This is truly a fundamental question that has fascinated me for years. I'm often surprised more people don't wonder about it. Most of us take for granted that we think complex thoughts, that we understand and participate in language and meaningful complex communication, that we are self-aware, that we remember our past, that we choose our actions in the present, and that we plan for our future behaviors and activities. This is just an introduction. We'll only be able to skip stones across the surface of these topics. In this set of episodes, we'll cover the following. First, what is consciousness and where does it come from? What is agency versus determinism? Next, we'll try to operationalize consciousness in order to choose to live a life of purpose and meaning. Then we'll open some time to discussing the historical development and evolution of human consciousness. Finally, we'll conclude by considering how to become more conscious. Please share your thoughts and participate in our developing discussion of consciousness, agency, and growth together. There are a couple of major paradigm shifts that we'll address as we explore consciousness and agency. First, a lot of the smart kids think that consciousness is largely an illusion and that your actions are determined, or in other words, that you do not have the ability to choose your own actions. Second, most approaches to understanding consciousness are scientific and reductionist. In response to these paradigms, I will try to demonstrate to you first that consciousness is an emergent principle of networked human minds in relationship with one another. And second, that amidst the infinite complexity of your creative mind in relation with other unknowably complex human minds, there is ample scope to choose and act in creative, novel ways according to your cultivated willpower. Let's begin with the first paradigm shift. Do you have meaningful consciousness or agency at all? A lot of the smartest kids around, meaning the ones with the doctorate degrees, the scientists, the philosophers, and even a lot of the theologians argue very strongly that consciousness is an illusion, that you do not choose what you do, that every action is determined and caused by the physical motions that preceded it. They apply this to balls on a pool table, atoms and bacteria, polar bears and people. They argue that you are determined by your genes, your environment, and everything that came before in a chain of causation leading ultimately back to the primordial universe when everything rapidly expanded outward and began to form light and stars and planets billions of years ago. The conclusion is that you may feel aware of your world and yourself, but this is likely an illusion, and you do not choose or shape your actions or anything else. You are a flesh robot, determined by your physical parts and the environment around you. But at the same time, they endlessly lecture you that you personally are destroying nature and the planet around you, and you should alter your behavior. Thank you, environmentalists, for demonstrating that we do in fact have consciousness, agency, and responsibility. Clearly, we at Being Humans Together reject these ideas for many reasons. First, determinism flies in the face of all of our experience. We experience awareness, consciousness, and the ability to make choices constantly. Second, even if our experience of consciousness and agency are not entirely accurate from a scientific or philosophical perspective, these ideas are immensely useful and effective. They bring us meaning and purpose. They help us learn, develop responsibility for our actions, and strive to obtain goals. In other words, awareness, consciousness, and agency are basic to our growth, development, and meaningful living. And the principle that humans are agents that make choices and are responsible for their own actions is the foundation of all shared human community and society. Leading us to a third point. How can you or anyone else be held accountable for the things they do, even crimes, if no one is truly conscious or able to choose their actions? Finally, what can be more human than consciousness? These principles are fundamental to who we are, how we understand the world and the universe around us, and how we consider our role within the world. So, are you conscious? Do you have the ability to make decisions? Are your thoughts, feelings, and actions meaningful? Let's try to lay out a working definition of consciousness to begin with. What range of concepts are we discussing here? One basic definition of consciousness is the state of being aware of and responsive to one's environment. This basic level of awareness applies to humans and many animals. If we add to that awareness of both external and internal states, then we start to get to a more human level of awareness. In other words, consciousness is the state of being aware of oneself and one's environment. Another way of saying consciousness of oneself is self-awareness, or having higher order thoughts and representations about our own existence and mental states. Moreover, let's add our awareness of our past experiences and selves, our present self and actions, and plans and intentions for our future altered selves. Let's begin with an example of the experience of consciousness. You're walking through the woods on a warm spring day, the sun raining through the leaves in sunbeams, the plants springing up in new life, the sounds of flowing water and birds and animals around you. You see a stream and sit on a fallen log and drink from the fresh water. Your senses are stimulated with images, warmth, light, sounds, smells, textures, and tastes. You're acutely aware of these things all around you. You can sense your body as you breathe, as you move your arms and legs, your hands and fingers. You feel your body's exertion, energy, your heart beating. And a feeling of vitality fills you. You're alive, and you feel connected to the living all around you. You become aware that you're happy to be alive, and you consider the trees all around you and the fallen tree that you're sitting on, and you consider new life, growth, aging, decay, and death. And you wonder at your own life, aging, and death. Perhaps you also feel a pang of fear or regret at the thought of your life ending, or the ending of the life of your elderly loved ones who cared for you and taught you to be a human being. You simultaneously experience vitality, joy, peace, stimulation, flow, gratitude, regret, fear, and uncertainty. And you wonder where it all comes from and where you may be going when it is all done. You don't know the answers, but you know you're alive and conscious. For simplicity's sake, we only included one individual and their response to the natural world in this exercise. But these experiences and thoughts don't arise in isolation. If you visualized this experience just now, you did it with me in the context of the words I'm speaking. And these words, ideas, and conscious experiences are very old and have passed down to us through countless generations of conscious human beings. The word consciousness comes from Latin conscientia, meaning shared knowledge. Isn't that interesting? Shared knowledge. Many centuries ago, the Romans understood what many scientists today have forgotten. Consciousness is not inside our brains or genes or hardware. It is shared between us. Consciousness emerges from networked human minds. Let's discuss the reductionist versus the emergent approaches to understanding consciousness and the world around us. Most science is built on the scientific method and reductionism. It begins by reducing a physical function to its core variable or variables and proposing a hypothesis about how it functions, such as the workings of a protein, the way light divides in a prism, or the way chemicals combine. Then you develop a scientific experiment to test the simple variables, to understand how the function works. Experiment repeatedly, gather data, interpret the data, draw conclusions. This scientific method is enormously powerful. Our technological understanding of the world and the universe is largely constructed on this methodology. But science also shows that some phenomena occur at different levels of complexity. Some things emerge from complex systems of interactions. For example, individual atoms do not have heat. Only groups of atoms moving around each other have temperature or heat. Temperature is an emergent property of groups of atoms and molecules. Similarly, despite what physicists may dream about, the behavior of animals cannot really be tested based on the motion of elemental particles or quantum theory. If you want to understand animal behavior, you need to, at the very least, test their genes or the functioning of their biological systems. Animal behavior emerges from cells and life and organs and complex organisms. If you want to understand the functioning of more complex patterns, such as ecosystems, you need to look at larger scales, at the interactions between large weather and climate systems, biomes, the behavior of groups of animals across multiple species. Ecology emerges from large-scale biological systems. The scientific method is powerful. Reductionism allows science to draw conclusions, and it allows engineers to produce technologies. And scientists are generally unwilling to sacrifice reductionism, because if you try to grapple with too many variables at once, you cannot draw strong conclusions. And so many scientists continue to practice reductionist science on human behavior, including consciousness. There are aspects of consciousness that can be studied at the reductionist micro level. David Chalmers identified two levels of scientific and philosophical inquiry into the problems of consciousness. First, the basic problems relate to the mechanisms of how our brains and sensory organs facilitate perception, cognition, basic awareness, and problem solving. Next, Chalmers described the hard problem of consciousness as the effort to understand and explain what is the origin and mechanism for the experience of consciousness, the sense of self, the personal awareness of experience, and the quality of that conscious awareness beyond the sensation of the experience itself. Let me repeat that. The hard problem of consciousness is the effort to understand and explain what is the origin and mechanism for the experience of consciousness, the sense of self, the personal awareness of experience, and the quality of that conscious awareness beyond the sensation of the experience itself. Additionally, why do each of us have our own particular sense of consciousness and identity separate from all others? There are a variety of scientific approaches to studying consciousness that have borne a variety of fruit. Neuroscientists study the workings of neurons, brain chemistry, and neuroimaging. They demonstrate corresponding patterns between brain activity and conscious experiences. Psychology, especially cognitive psychology and developmental psychology, conduct behavioral experiments. Unfortunately, the enormous complexity of human behavior means that psychology often struggles with replication problems. I feel that developmental psychology is a promising field for understanding consciousness because it studies the development of awareness and consciousness as young people learn and mature. Next, computational approaches and integrated information theory. These consider the relationship between systems of information and consciousness. This seems pretty powerful in our moment of artificial intelligence. Medical science also brings interesting approaches to consciousness, particularly when exploring the effects of various trauma and injuries to the brain, sense organs, etc., on our ability to perceive, respond to stimuli, use language, and act. There are other scientific approaches as well. These approaches have helped us understand a variety of physical mechanisms in the brain and sense organs that influence how we perceive the world, respond to stimuli, solve problems, and make decisions. But they can't solve the hard problem of consciousness. Why we feel conscious, how we are aware of what we perceive and experience, and what it means to be individually conscious. I argue to you that focusing on neurons, neural nets, brain chemistry, or other minute or individual approaches misses the nature of human consciousness. Consciousness is not hardware. Our hardware, our brains and genetic expressions in our bodies, are capable of participating in conscious behaviors, experiences, and activities. But consciousness is software that we learn. Consciousness is bigger than each of us. It is between us. It is something old that we inherited, that we participate in, that we have received from those who raised us and taught us, and from past generations going back thousands of years. To reject higher order networked consciousness is to blind ourselves to who we are as a member of human networks in communion with one another. Almost 400 years ago, René Descartes argued, "I think, therefore I am." The problem with that axiom is that we don't really think individually. I know that sounds strange and contrary to your impressions, but most of the thoughts that we have are thoughts we received from others, that we share, that we pass around, that we agree on or disagree about. Language, the very tools we use to construct our ideas and build our understanding, to conceive of the world, to describe it, and to formulate our actions and plans. Language is not anything that you or I invented. Our linguistic and mental tools for understanding, experiencing, and acting in the world are an heritage we receive from our caregivers and countless generations before. Do you really think you came up with yourself in your brain? That seems narrow, even deluded. The reductionist theories of physicists and geneticists and neurochemists will always fail because the things that make us conscious human beings are of a higher order. They are emergent properties of human minds, those complex, unknowable, unpredictable, creative, and even chaotic human minds, networked together in cooperative and competitive activities. They cannot be explained or determined by electromagnetism, gravity, nuclear forces, or neurons firing. Finally, the entire argument that we are determined by fundamental forces, elemental particles, and other basic physical forces is strange to make in language philosophically to other humans. Hey, meat robots, you're all meat robots. It doesn't make sense. And why bother saying it at all? What's the point? My response is this. Hey, meat robots, you're not meat robots. You are self-aware human beings with the capacity to participate and contribute meaningfully to the beautiful and complex relational experience of consciousness and living well. Embrace the legacy you've been given. Connect and grow and build until the moment you relinquish life. Pass the human dance on. The principle of emergence is a much better way of understanding human consciousness. Consider the profound complexity of the human brain. There is more complexity of networked connections within your brain than there are connections between stars and planets in an entire galaxy. The complexity of your brain, and more broadly, your mind, is unknowable and unpredictable. And we do not live alone. We are constantly connecting with other human beings, networking, communicating, planning together, working together, competing together, getting to know each other, forming relational knowledge and bonds between us in complex, changing, and evolving webs of human networks. Thus, the complexity of human capacity increases exponentially with the complexity in networked human relations. Consciousness emerges out of that incalculable complexity of the networking of human minds and brains. It arises from the fundamental drive of humans to harmonize and communicate and cooperate with one another. This social evolution is human nature, and it produces human consciousness. I want to add one more dimension to this formulation to try to bring the micro and the macro levels together. This is a debt I owe to the neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists. Part of the structure of our brains are mirror neurons. Mirror neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you observe the same action being performed. Mirror neurons contribute to learning. When you watch something happen, when you watch another person doing something, you experience it yourself and you begin to learn to do it yourself. This also helps us connect to and understand the intentions of others, to learn empathy and develop social interactions. The human brain is wired with structures that facilitate continual contact, learning, and copying of behavior. Furthermore, these structures facilitate mutual understanding, empathy, relational knowledge, and bonds. Now, you may think that now I'm agreeing that it can all be collapsed and contained within one mind, but that's not what I'm saying. Mirror neurons reflect your response to the environment, and most particularly, your response to other human beings doing things, showing you examples, you experiencing that vicariously by watching and then learning and copying and performing the behaviors yourself. From this, consciousness develops and grows. My friend, you are not a meat robot. You are not determined by the motions of genes or proteins, or even powerful human institutions. You are a conscious, self-aware agent. Your family helped you to develop into such a conscious being. You are connected with dozens of other conscious humans. All of us looking at each other, copying each other, telling so many stories, singing so many songs, but also singing and telling fundamentally similar human songs and stories. You're not alone. You're connected. Your life, your existence, your thoughts and feelings are connected through your memories and shared experiences, and through your actual relationships and cooperative activities with dozens and hundreds of other humans who know you and care about you, and through our overlapping networks of relationships and our communities. We are all interconnected. If this is meaningful to you, please share it with someone you care about. Get together, converse, laugh, eat, drink, and please like, subscribe, join the discussion here. You're very welcome here. And thank you for sharing your time and attention. It is precious. Amen, amen. This is the way of being humans together.